Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. As many of you know, I look for guests that have messaging beyond just accomplishment. And I'm totally stoked today to welcome Mark Rampolla to our show. Now, while that name may not make a lot of sense to a lot of you, I think if you've ever noticed a coconut water brand by the name of ZICO, or a water brand that I notice basically at every store in Vail, Colorado, Liquid Death. Those are two companies Mark has been intimately involved with. Mark's story, as with a lot of our guests, is a journey, starting in the Peace Corps, moving into a corporate environment, and then ultimately, a couple of decades ago, breaking out on his own to found a coconut water brand pretty much ahead of everybody else. Mark, what was that like when you left a stable corporate job and all of a sudden you're going to start selling flavored water?
Right.
Did your friends think you had lost it? Tell me about what happened there.
Well, first, Gary, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
My
I've
pleasure.
been listening to your show, and I love it. I love your approach, and I think you'll understand why I think that behind the scenes approach of what people don't really know about CEOs is something I'm really passionate about. But look, for me, yeah, I had a lot of people that thought I was crazy, and particularly because I had back in that day, you may recall, International Paper was a Fortune 50 company. They were highly respected. I was doing very well with them. I had a clear path to somewhere in the C-suite, and I was sort of on the early identify path. But what was interesting is the people that really knew me were not surprised, including, interestingly enough, my boss. My boss was totally surprised, couldn't believe it. Why would I do this? Is that ridiculous? One of my mentors was a very, very senior executive, president of International Paper Europe, went on to be CEO of numerous public companies. He got it right away. And so did some friends of mine. But people that didn't know me that well thought I was absolutely crazy. And even those that knew me thought, okay, fine, he's going to do something entrepreneurial, but coconut water? What is it? Why is he doing
Where did that
this?
come from? I mean, how did it?
Well, you talk about stories, right? And I can look back now and see, well, it makes sense. Did leave college and join the Peace Corps. So I lived in Central America, and I think a lot of people have experiences like this, but I drank coconut water all the time. It was literally written into the Peace Corps manual as a source of safe hydration and electrolytes, in desperate needs, as well as just a wonderful, refreshing beverage. But it wouldn't be until a decade later that the business I was running for International Paper was a beverage packaging business. I was selling to beverage, mainly juice and dairy companies in Central America, but I was tracking the industry. I was watching the brands. And vitamin water had just launched in probably 2000 and by 2003, when I was thinking about leaving and looking for something to do, I was tracking the beverage industry, and vitamin water was taking off and hot. And so, yeah, the big idea for me was, I think it was this realization that I want to do something that has meaning for me. It's consistent with my values. I was super active. I've been very healthy. I'd stopped drinking Gatorade forever ago, but I was an athlete and still always looking for hydration replenishment. I loved and grew up with natural foods. And I didn't know it then, but I think intuitively I had a sense of I love brands. I love connection. And I was in a B2B business. And I think I love the idea of dealing more with people and more with consumers. So a lot of those, I brainstormed a ton of ideas, and this one just kind of stuck. It kind of stuck. I'll also give credit. There is something about ideas in the zeitgeist, right? And so there are a lot of reasons why coconut water made sense then because, consumers were just beginning to, look more and more for natural products. A lot of people were traveling abroad. So it was something in the air, so to say.
So where did the name come from?
Yeah, we made it up, and I wanted some. I knew I wanted. I did some research on sort of great brands, Coke, Pepsi, Nike, others, and the thing I learned is short, memorable. Certain consonants make things more memorable. X's, K's, K sounds, and then so I wanted short, memorable in some way either associated with coconut water or health and wellness, and then non-offensive in the major nine world languages.
Ah,
And
interesting.
so I developed, I had, my sister was one of my early investors. She sort of helped me brainstorm. We developed a spreadsheet with every possible letter combination, right? Pre-AI, of course, every possible letter combination between 3 and 5 letters, eliminated 90% of them because they were just ridiculous, stuck to a handful and ran them through a process. Can we register it? Does it mean anything? Does it make sense? Tested it out in languages, different languages, and Zico just sort of stuck.
It's amazing. It's you must be very good at Wordle.
Eh, I put it this way. I taught my daughters to play Boggle very early,
Right.
and I would never let them win. They started beating me by about 12, by rivaling me by 15. I'm like, okay, I'm done. Let's do something
You're
else
done.
because they
You
were
forget
beating me.
it. Yeah, it's over. And I'm sure they still take great joy in beating dad. That's a
Yeah, for
great
sure.
story. So you've come up with a name. You got to start it.
Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't just show up. You just all of a sudden don't have a factory with raw materials being shipped in.
right.
Walk me through logistically how that happened. You had the great idea. You settled on it. You knew your market. You understood the packaging side, obviously. How do you start going from there as a founder? By the way, never having done it before. You're also going to be CEO. That's a heavy lift. How do you move
Yeah,
it
you're
from
bringing
there?
me back, Gary. You're bringing me back. I think one thing, I was good at research. I've always been good at research, and I've been very methodical. So I spent a lot of time breaking down, okay, how do I want to, what are all the steps? What are all the components? Sourcing, packaging, processing, what are all the options? And I think it was surprisingly helpful that I knew nothing on the branding, go-to-market side at all. How do you brand? How do you position? I never worked in a consumer product or a, distribution business at all. But what I knew really well, in addition to the packaging, the business that I ran, we sold processing equipment and serviced them. So for a dairy or juice company, we would basically install a line that did everything from receiving the beverage, mixing the beverage to putting out the final side in
Ah,
cases. So I actually knew quite a bit, and I knew quite a bit of people in the industry. So I found a few consultants that could help me sort of do all this work and analysis. And one of the key steps was what somebody would call make buy analysis. What would it take to make this ourselves? And so I literally had someone, a consultant I work with in Latin America, help me build out a whole plan to build a processing and filling line, manufacturing facility somewhere in Latin America. So I had all the costs, the whole structure for that, and then could compare that to just buy it. And then, kind of went through a process of finding people around the world that were processing coconuts and figuring out what they had in equipment, and found a group in Brazil that at the time, the real, the Brazilian real was so cheap, it made no sense to manufacture ourselves. We could get a great product out of Brazil very cheaply. Now, 3 years later, the real went through the roof. That situation changed, but at least it allowed me to get into the market.
So you're so you had the processing side, you had the container side. Now you've got to ship
Yeah,
and you've got to market, and
yeah,
somebody's got to pay you for your product.
yeah.
How'd that start?
Oh boy, I again did a lot of research on, okay, how does this market work? Who buys and sells and distributes, and how does this happen? And as I was learning from scratch, I was fortunate to tap and talk to a lot of people that were in the industry. So I came in with what one might call beginner's mind, like, okay, I don't know anything. So I just got to learn. So I just learned and learned and learned, read. And then I read case studies. How did Red Bull do this? How did Vitamin Water do this? How did Snapple do this? How did Coke and Pepsi do this forever ago? Learned all those case studies. And then I figured I still don't know what the right decision is on. Do I have a distributor? Do I have, a broker? So I said, we're going to do it ourselves. So I hired a very small team, and for a couple weeks, all we did was go out, but I was still living in Latin America. I kind of hired them to do this in New York, and I came up and visited, going out and sampling on the streets, talking to retailers, talking to gyms and yoga studios and college campuses, just to learn. And the place that really popped up as super interesting were these yoga studios, hot yoga studios that were becoming really popular in the mid 2000s. And they're not passive. This is 90 minutes at 108 degrees and doing these crazy positions. And it was a lot of athletes. There were professional athletes doing this type of yoga. But by and large, it was women who were very fit, a lot of whom had traveled to Latin America or Asia, so they knew coconut water and they understood the hydrating properties. So then the question became, okay, how do we get to them? And while I was figuring out distributors and other stuff, I decided, let's rent a van. Let's rent a van. So we rented a van and started selling. And, I'm not even sure we had the right licenses, day one, but eventually figured that out. Literally, some months we had more in parking tickets than sales. But eventually it started to grow.
You bring me back to a memory when I had shoulder surgery maybe 20 years ago. I couldn't, standard PT was not rehabbing us. So I got into Bikram yoga. I got into hot yoga. Never
Wow.
looked as good as I should have, but I hung in there. I hated every minute of it. But
Amazing.
I recall that when I would leave, your product would be prominently displayed in the lobby. And a lot of times, and I think you had it in a screw top bottle
Yeah.
with the blue
Yes.
label,
Yes.
very memorable. And it was like, oh, that looks good. And it's right there.
Yep. That
So
was
I was an early user
Was
from
that
that
in the city?
distribution
Was
channel.
that in Manhattan?
Fascinating. Yeah, it was. A lot of times.
Look, and I'll tell you, Gary, that was very intentional, and I think one of the best things we ever did. And I now see the power of focus, the power of intention and focus, and inch wide, mile deep. And where that came from was when I researched all these beverage brands, I also researched Facebook and Nike and Under Armour. And what I found is the pattern I found is Facebook, people often forget, it was only Harvard University for a period of time. And then it was only the Ivy League. Now, it expanded really fast, but it did have a very hyper focus. Uber was San Francisco, right? There's this focus area. Under Armour was high school sports, right? In Mid-Atlantic region. Red Bull was in bars in California. Sample outside in activities, but sell in bars. So when we launched, I was looking for what's going to be our Harvard, what's going to be our, nightclub. And I thought it might be Latino community in sports and college and stuff like that. That didn't resonate. They thought canned coconut water that's filled with sugar was the real deal. These yogis. So once that started to work, I decided we're going to own it. So we went super deep to be own a little part of consumers' mind, which was post-workout recovery. So, and you may remember this, but the goal would have been, okay, Gary, or probably more ideally Gary's girlfriend or wife or sister or somebody, but Gary as well. When you go in there, the instructor is drinking ZICO. The person in front of the studio is drinking ZICO post workout typically. And literally we got to a place where the instructor would say, 15 minutes to ZICO, like just hang in there, then you can have your ZICO. We were so associated with that. That gave us a reason to be and to branch out from there. The goal was never to be only in yoga studios, but it was a great place to start.
It makes all the sense in the world. So let me switch gears just a little bit. The founder's mindset and the operator's mindset are not always compatible. There's a lot of great ideas, a lot of great companies where the founder tries to hang on too long as the CEO, and it can kind of go sideways a little bit.
Mm,
So you seem to have approached this primarily from an outcomes base, working backwards. How do we
mhm,
get to X,
mhm,
but still with that finders or entrepreneurial mindset?
mhm,
First, congratulations, because that's incredibly unusual in
mhm,
that
mhm.
world. Did you realize at the time you were doing that?
Oh,
Were
that's a
you
great
worried about
question.
the operational
Yeah,
side?
no. At the time, no. That's a simple answer. I was during the Zico era, I was so in the grind. I was so in the business, I had a hard time thinking out about the business. And I certainly wasn't thinking about myself, to be frank, in a meta way, right? In a truly self-reflective way. That came later for me. But over, so I was in it. I was grinding away. I was like, looking back now, I can see, yeah, that's normal. So many founders do that. But I was very unconscious when I look at that. And I see now that I've been out of that for a while. Now we look at 1,000 investment opportunities a year as a firm. We maybe invest in 3 to 4, but I've personally or through our firm have invested in 100 companies. I've been on countless boards. I talk to hundreds of entrepreneurs in depth every year. And what I see is that you're absolutely right. There's a mindset that's very different between an entrepreneur and an operator. But one of the things I think people forget is a mindset. It's not just like you can have it or change it, right? It takes work. It's like one of the things I love is people will talk about, yeah, three needs for success in any business: mindset, skill set, tool set. And the skills and tools are usually specific to wealth management, beverage, investing, whatever it is. But people talk about mindset as if it's just like, we'll just have a great mindset, right? But how? Right? And what is that mindset? And you've nailed a very important distinction. There is an entrepreneurial mindset. Some people have it, some don't, but it can be cultivated, it can be understood, it can be reinforced, it can be, and similarly with an operator. They're different mindsets. And it is pretty rare to see them combined. And we see that all the time. And I'll give you an example. I know now I did a very good job. I was a very good entrepreneur and I was a very good operator, but I wasn't absolutely best in class. And there's no humility in that because I now know what best in class looks like. And because we invest in it and we see it. And you're absolutely right. A lot of our companies, I spent a lot of my time helping founders be self-aware enough, reflect, and understand what is their zone of genius, is the term
Yeah.
we'll often use for it. How do you spend more time there and less in the stuff that, there's other people that can do that better? Usually that's other functions, finance, operations, whatever. Sometimes it's the whole business, right? To bring in a true operator.
You are absolutely preaching to the choir, both observationally and a story I'll share with you personally later. Um, there are certain things if you recognize you're really good at, I mean, just exceptionally good at, that may have opportunities beyond what you originally dreamed. But then you have to go and kind of stack the operational side, everything from setting up the fundraising to the payroll to the HR to the stock plan. and you're looking at it and you can figure it out. You can get it done. But every minute you're thinking about that, you're not thinking creatively how to improve what your offering looks like on the front end,
Absolutely.
which is where the value is really created.
Exactly. I
And
spend time, a lot of
that's a tough
time with,
dance.
and one of the things, I know we'll get to my book later that I write about is this exercise of a way to do that, which is a series of exercises that guide somebody through identifying their zone of genius versus their zone of excellence, competence, and incompetence. And when you can distinguish those, it's, to your point, it's unbelievably powerful. Just 10% more time in your zone of genius can make a dramatic difference. And what I've seen is when you can do that, you also create space for somebody else to step in their zone of genius. So I'll give you an example. I have a partner in GroundForce, Dan. Dan is, ran a $1 billion hedge fund in his 30s. Like the guy is a mental machine, a finance machine, a processing machine, very methodical, very organized, very disciplined. I'm much more on the creative side and much more bold thinking, big thinking. And I'm frankly not that great at maintenance. And I never have been, I never will be. I sought out a partner that had that complementary skill set. And so, and he, I can do almost everything he does. He can certainly do everything I do, but I do what I do better. And some of what I do, I'm amazing at. He does what he does better. And so it works beautifully. And what I see is so many founders are trying to be someone else. They're trying to be you. They're trying to be me. They're trying to be Musk. And we share all these stories of them. They're great to learn about, but they're great to learn about them. So, what I encourage entrepreneurs is let's learn about you. How do you know, own, and celebrate yourself? Because you're amazing. You have gifts, you have talents. Let's help you figure out how to bring those to the world, stay in those. That's what jazzes me about what I do is helping everyone find and stay in their zone of genius. And that to me also means give your greatest gifts to the world.
So let's walk through a scenario. I'm asking for a friend. Someone has an idea, it might have been in your zone. Someone has an idea to come in with an idea that will completely disrupt a market where there's an annual spend of $200 million. It's just wasted. And you know it's a terrible market, it hasn't changed. The demand is extraordinary. The demographics all work. You have an individual that comes up with an idea which involves utilization of a completely new process,
Mhm.
utilization of some well-founded, deeply embedded psychological analysis,
Mhm.
and some really cool AI,
Mhm.
generative AI, predictive AI, and probabilistic AI
Mhm.
that's algorithm driven. And it's a great idea.
Mhm.
Now, there's plenty of firms out there
Mhm.
that, especially big ones, looking to invest seed capital. And
Mhm.
their pitch is we can round out and give you the experience of operators. We can put you in touch with other founders and so on down the line. But obviously, there's going to be a cost. They're going to want more of your company up front than you're probably
Mhm.
willing to sell
Mhm.
versus going out and pitching it on your own and
Mhm.
then trying to backfill
Mhm.
and hire people, which you may have never done,
Mhm.
and hope you get the right people and can get
Mhm.
that launch. I think because of how much aligned experience you had
Mhm.
in IP, had a lot of that institutional knowledge when you
Yes.
launched ZICO. But how would it go, Mark, if it was just a pure idea in your
Mhm.
zone of genius
Mhm.
that you knew had traction, could improve the lives of countless people, all the
Mhm.
things we look for?
Mhm.
Do you find the people that excel at the things you're ultimately going to need up front,
Mhm.
or do you try and do it all until you realize you're way past the Peter principle?
Yeah. Oh, great. Ooh, love that. Love that. First thing I often ask founders, particularly people at this stage, right, with just an idea, how would you feel about pursuing this idea if you knew that it would take a decade, that along the way you're going to make, probably less money than a good level, college grad, recent college grad, and you have a less than 10% chance of ever making any real money. Are you still interested? Because the people that are like, what do you mean? They're out. They should be out. Whether they're never going to make it, right? The only person that has a shot is the one that's like, look, I'm going to do this no matter what. So I'm going for it, right? So given that, right, what I would say is there's no substitute for, well, I'd say this. Outside perspective is wonderful for a period of time. It is absolutely a common theme to have somebody come into an industry from the outside. In many ways, although I had this background on the supply chain, I knew nothing about the brand and market side. That's the most common thing. But I would say that I haven't seen, I can think of a hundred examples of people that had great ideas, didn't know the space, and partnered with people that knew the industry and were successful. I know very many that tried not to and failed. And I can't think of any, but there's probably a few out there that have succeeded without deep knowledge of the specific industry and function and expertise beyond just the idea stage, the actual execution. So that's why most venture firms, we're not technically a venture firm, and particularly in tech, like co-founders, because you bring complementary skill sets. Usually there's a technical and a commercial. Usually there's a, big idea person and a practical person because you need those multiple skill sets. But I would say that rarely and I did a fair amount of angel investing back in my day, but even then I would always look for that combination of big idea, but deep executional knowledge and capabilities. And so you either have it or you find it. You find it. The idea of going to an investor that can bring those things, I hate those ideas. I do. I've seen some work. I've seen some work, but generally speaking, I've seen a lot more not work. I've seen people give away a lot of their company. And unless you can really diligence their execution, other companies that are very similar that can proof point and you can point to the results, I'd say find the people. But I also think the idea of going it alone and just slugging through to go raise money from people, find people that are in the industry, find people that can execute, find those partners. And then, you know, it's a question of how big the pie can be, right? We're all playing with partial pies, right? 100% of nothing's nothing. So I encourage people like bring somebody in, structure something that makes it very attractive to them, but don't try to hero your way through something alone.
That makes all the sense in the world. I've seen studies that absolutely support what you've just articulated. I think you're kind of in that unicorn space, frankly, because you were brought up in the world of execution and reporting, but at the same time, you iterated through, I would say, creative discrimination
Mm,
where you kept looking at different things and until you distilled down what was left. It's like you kept chipping away at it and said, here's what's left. This is what we're going to do. Then you had the singular focus to drive it home. So you sell Zico, it's a success,
yes.
but you're not happy. What
Yeah.
happened?
Yeah. Well, look, that took me a couple years to realize, frankly. So immediately after selling it, I felt like I was, super, super happy, more than I expected. I'd made friends and family a fair chunk of money, bought and redid a beautiful beach house right out in LA and on the beach, and took time off and traveled the world, spent time with my young daughters. Did write a first book about that Zico journey, and everything seemed great. I became a very active angel investor, and thought I was great, right? Everything seemed great until a few years later, little by little. things started to fall apart. Looking at my investment portfolio, I started to realize, yeah, not everything I touch is gold. 5 years in, I started to realize, ooh, man, there's a lot of mistakes I made, and some of that's normal. But I started to realize, okay, did I really have a process? What was my objective? Was I really thoughtful about this? Was I very disciplined about this? And I started to realize I wasn't. And I started to realize how I was very driven by gotta have more, gotta invest, gotta drive, gotta do. My health started to not be so great. I was drinking quite a bit. I was super active. I skied, I mountain biked until my back would go out, which happened about every 3, 4 months.
Mm.
And then I would work on it, work on it, work on it, get it back. And then I'd be afraid it's going to go out all the time. And I'm all kind of in pain and figuring out what to do. My marriage that I think many people thought, and we certainly thought was going to go the distance, started to fall apart.
Mm.
And so I remember waking up one day and looking out over the Pacific in a beautiful home and thinking, God, I'm quote unquote successful, but am I free? Am I really free to live the life that I want when I'm busy as ever? I got a crazy schedule. I'm grinding away at companies. I've started this investment firm. I'm like, I'm feeling like I feel trapped. I feel trapped. And like, how the hell do I just trap myself again? I got out and here I am again. And so I went through a 7 year process pretty much of just starting to question everything. Okay, what did I believe? What was the fantasy? What was the dream originally for Zico? And where did that come from? And what did I believe success would look like? And I realized, oh, I'm modeling this after him and her, and I'm influenced by my dad and my mom, and I'm conflicted in this way. And so I just started to, read a ton, working with world-class coaches and therapists and reading about ancient spirituality. I got pretty deep in neuroscience and just started to realize how much programming I was following, right? How conditioned I was, and that I had bought into this myth. Have a great idea, go all in, bust your ass for years, make a pile of money, and then you're free. Yay, off to the races. Everything's great, right? And I realized, yeah, not so much. And when I talk to more and more entrepreneurs, I realized, man, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
We've all bought into that. Just like your whole setup for this podcast is like, if you really knew behind the scenes, most entrepreneurs are, we look like swans across the water, beautiful, smooth, but underneath it's like scramble, 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 more, right? And so, that's when I started to kind of rethink my life.
I could have retitled this podcast When the Dog Catches the Car.
Yeah, exactly.
He just wants to catch that car, and all of a sudden it's like, ruh-roh, that wasn't such a great idea after all.
Yeah, yeah.
I would let me pose one follow-up question to this. As you started to get and narrow your focus on Zico, there comes a point where you're right at that tipping point. You're not assuming success because you got to keep working, but you really know you're onto something.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast that to the dawning realization that after the exit, you got a little diffuse in what you want to try and accomplish.
Very good point. Very good point. A dog needs a car or needs a bone, right? And
That's
so,
true.
but to me, the difference was I want to be conscious about needing a bone. I don't want that to be unconscious. So for Zico, I needed that. It worked. I was maniacally focused, but I wasn't actually aware. Oh, I see what I'm doing. I'm maniacally focusing here in order to achieve this and this and this. And I'm consciously recognizing I'm not taking care of my health. I'm not cultivating my relationship. I'm denying and avoiding my emotions. And so when I look at all of those things, that was a steeper price than I want to pay. next time. I want to pay from now forward. And I also started to realize, in many ways, I was so maniacally focused, I wasn't even present. I was so future focused. Just get a little further, just get there, just get there. I wasn't, sure, I showed up, I worked hard, I was doing all the things. I was so in my head, I'm not actually in my body experiencing them,
Right.
not feeling the emotions. And so I missed out on half of the experience.
Well, they were there, you just didn't notice them.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
there's actually a scientific basis in neuroscience, a part of your brain that processes information. Our subconscious basically can absorb 11 million bits of information per second. We can only focus on 11 of those pieces at one
Mm,
time. It's called the reticular activation system.
yep.
So when you started ZICO, you had a singular purpose. Everything had to fit into that funnel, as you said, a maniacal focus. The only thing that got in that you really noticed were things that would further you down the road. Then you catch the car.
Right.
And okay, I should feel this way. I should feel that way, which I think are terrible ways to tell anybody how they should feel. You feel like you feel.
Absolutely.
But then that reflective journey, looking back, saying, wait a second, this doesn't feel like I thought it would.
Yeah.
Where did I go wrong? That I think is the real lesson because now all of a sudden you're reflecting on those experiences, which to me is the derivation of wisdom. And I think that was probably what you began to realize as you looked internally and examined what you did and what you did.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy journey.
It's a very, very well said, Gary, and I do agree with that. When I think about my understanding of that whole process of the reticular activation system and all that is you're absolutely right. Attention, where we place our attention, and what I realized is my attention was predominantly outward, Zico, other people, finances, marketing, selling. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But it was not on what's going on within me. And what I realized is that is, again, I would argue, in fact, I would argue it's less than half of reality. The vast majority of reality is happening within us because we create our own experiences from the way we interact with the outer world. And so there's nothing wrong with that, but to your point, I think I did come to some sense of wisdom, which is fascinating. What if I changed that focus? What if I started to paid more attention to what's going on within me? And what might change. And what was fascinating is I started to notice, first of all, more what's going on within me. I could also be more present in a meeting, in a conversation, more choiceful about where and how I spent my time. And little by little, I felt more calm, more present, and more free that
Hmm.
I can actually choose to be here. And what I started to see is I was getting at least as good results in the outer world, if not better. Because versus Zico, I spent so much time, and I see this with so many founders, you know, engaged in the mental exercises. Yes, there's a certain amount of focus that's on the business, for, 12, 10, 12, however many hours, 14 hours a day. But meanwhile, I am doing so many things unconsciously that is this meeting to your back to the energy point, the zone of genius. Am I in this meeting because I really want to be here? It's an energy up meeting for me here, or am I here because I should be here? Because I think I should be here, because I've made up this story. And so one of the tricks I use with entrepreneurs and I write about, what's the story you're telling yourself? It's a way to catch that little unconscious programming. And to your point, bring your attention to something different than just this outer world, to the story. And that little break I think is so liberating to then be in choice and say, oh yeah, yeah, I can see. I think I should show up at this meeting because, oh yeah, I think I'm that important and that it's going to fall apart if I'm not there. So therefore, I've been doing this meeting 2 hours a week for the last 3 months, and I'm going to do it forever. That's quite a bit of time. Am I certain? What if I chose differently? What if I didn't attend one and just observed what happened? What if I work a little bit less in the grind and a little bit more thoughtfully? What might happen, right? So that's the game I started to play with myself. Yeah.
How much time elapsed between the publication, the writing of High Hanging Fruit, and your recently released book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Freedom? What was the time span between
Ooh,
those two?
great question, Gary. Give me a second to think about that. I sold ZICO 2013. I don't think I published the book until 2015. So it might be 10 years. Might be 10 years.
I do a lot of I do a lot of work with archetypes.
Mm,
As an investment advisor, I was lucky. I realized early on that to keep people on my book of business that I didn't resonate with, that I didn't see things beyond just a provider and a buyer, that I didn't necessarily agree with their mores or their uh, way they approach life. I was fortunate. I ended up with a book of people that I loved. Some were on the right, some were on the left, some were in the middle, but we shared things on a much deeper level, which was
mm,
why I was able to, in my world, I would call it servant leadership.
mm.
I serve at their pleasure, but if they don't listen to me, I tell them to go someplace else
Yeah,
because they hired me to be responsible for an outcome. And I can get you there, but let me do my job.
yeah.
So it requires being flexible with your own personality. Most people, if we go look at Carl Jung's archetypical
Yeah.
wheel, normal people are going to fall on one or maybe two. I fall on four, which
Mm,
I'm proud of.
mm,
People who don't fall any are basically
mm.
sociopaths
Yeah,
because
right.
they can't be characterized. When I look at your first book, which was goal driven with a specific outcome, that would test for one set of archetypes. And your second book, which is more an internal thought of dog catches car,
Mm,
would test for a completely different set of archetypes.
yeah, yeah.
So, and I'm fascinated by that because what you were able to do was evolve by introspection
Mm,
and
mm.
acquire in a reflective, not always easy manner, wisdom that now to me appears to be your happy place.
Yeah, that's well said, Gary. I appreciate that. Well, I'm a big fan of Carl Jung and archetypes, and I've got some on my wall of what I use those regularly. And we do as a firm, we do Enneagram work, we do Myers-Briggs work, we do really deep personality assessments internally ourselves with our CEOs, so we understand each other, where we're coming from, how we talk about it. And you're right, I have never felt more content and yeah, so I'd say happy in my life, although the happiness comes and goes, right? There's days I'm not always perfectly happy, but I it's okay now. I can see they're just emotions, they just energy moving through the body. That's just part of this journey. But what I do feel is that I am finding my purpose, which is in many ways is servant leadership, which is I want to help everyone I work with, everyone I connect with, just appreciate themselves a little bit more, find and stay in their zone of genius, and bring their gifts to the world. And I'll tell you a story that really motivates me. I've heard this story has come up in multiple cultures. In fact, there was an anthropologist that I first learned this from, Angeles Arias, I think it was. She was a cultural anthropologist, studied across the world for different stories that would come up in different traditions. One of them is there's a wise woman, let's call her Zuza, who is the wisest, most respected woman in her village. She knows she's going to die soon. She goes off to the mountains to commune with the angels, and she comes back and she's distraught. She's really sad, confused, nervous. And the community says, "But Zuza, you're our most wisest and trusted elder. What could they have told you that scared you so?" And she said, they told me the question they're going to ask me when I die. And the question is, Zuza, why weren't you Zuza? Zuza, why weren't you Zuza? Mark, why weren't you Mark? Gary, why weren't you Gary? We're all trying to be someone else. How do we be us? That's it. To me, that's the beauty and goal of this life. And so I'm on that journey for myself, and I want to invite others to go on that journey as well. And I'm just choosing to do that in entrepreneurship, which
You
is
know, it's
people I
funny
love that make the
in my
impact at
study,
scale.
yeah, in my study of archetypes, I mean, it's just as I'm listening to you, there's two that are predominant. They might be on your wall, knowledge seeker and healer.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
leaving the world a better place has its own rewards.
yeah, yeah.
There's not enough folks out there that understand the concept of generosity, of grace, of living vicariously through someone else's success. I was very fortunate because I got to engineer financial success for 100 or 125 families and
Amazing.
know that I made a difference, not just in their lives, but in their kids and generations. I don't know where that ends. That's fine.
Yeah,
Um, and it's okay. And that's when I teach other advisors, that's the major focus I
yeah,
take. If you're not in love with this person's success and this person's story, you're kidding yourself.
yeah,
Don't
yeah.
don't don't take them.
Right. And
Um,
I'll tell you, I've been waiting for the wealth management firm that defines success more broadly than even the financial side, right? Like, how are we how are we helping this family? And people talk about it, but a lot of it's lip service on really achieve their maximum potential, right? And some of that's challenging, not about at all about money. Sometimes money is an inhibitor to that. Not that there's nothing wrong with it, but to encourage that, particularly for the next generation, particularly for the next
you
generation.
you are you are so correct. I mean, it goes to what my people would say, well, what is it you do? Oftentimes, and I would say I fix problems. Well,
Mm,
what kind of problems? Depends.
yeah,
And I would get to a point where what I wanted to do was understand the why, not the what. What are
yeah,
you trying to do? I'm trying to make money. Why?
yeah, yeah,
Explain
exactly.
it to me. What's it for? How
Yeah,
much do you need to have? How important is that goal to you? And I wouldn't put anybody's money to work until I had clearly articulated goals, which I could solve for mathematically,
yeah,
and then use a very, very well-founded, boring discipline to get you there. I'm not going to have the highest number. I'm not going to have the lowest number, but I'm going to get you what you want. And that's how I built my practice. And fortunately, I did it at a time when Merrill Lynch was very supportive of it. I ended up managing clients and teaching off and on for 12 years. So I got to travel way too much. Anyone who thinks
great.
business travel is fun clearly has never
Yeah,
done it. But I met a lot of great people, a lot of whom are now my consulting clients. So I'm right on board with you. Tell me about your book
yeah.
and tell me about if there's some founders out there that are beyond the seed stage when they should go and look for GroundForce Capital.
Sure. So the book is called An Entrepreneur's Guide to Freedom. It's available on Amazon, and I'm thrilled to hear and learn and surprise in a beautiful way. It just hit a bestseller, the top 50 in the country this week
That's excellent.
as a national bestseller. The basic premise is very much what we're talking about. Most people think entrepreneurs are automatically, free, right? They're pursuing their goal, they're living their dreams, on their way, or have made a ton of money, therefore they must be free. I am blowing up that myth, calling the reality. I and many other people are much more trapped than they think, whether they're in the grind, have made millions or billions. I've seen it. I see it again and again. And so I'm giving people the tools and the skills that can help build the mindset that delivers, helps them live in freedom right here, right now, whatever their circumstances are, and no matter what comes up. Very specific tools and skills that I've used, I've studied, I've borrowed, I've put to the test, and I've used with our team and the companies that we work with. And I'm bringing it to the world. And my goal with that is just to help leaders get more what they want out of this life, feel more comfortable in their own skin, and deliver even better results with a little bit more ease, a little bit more and relaxed state, a little bit more present state that I know works. I know works. And so that's what this book is about. And I'm thrilled that it's been, really well received thus far. It's really written for entrepreneurs from startup all the way through to sold and made, hundreds of millions or billions or millions. But as a firm, we invest in the growth stage. So we're looking for companies that are predominantly consumer facing, or services in the consumer products industry, brands, better for you, health and wellness brands, beauty brands, beverages, foods, et cetera. At the growth stage for us means probably minimum 20 million in revenue. And we typically invest, anywhere from 15 to 30 million dollars in each company. So definitely not early stage. But the alignment is, I would love to see entrepreneurs that, kind of get onto this track, therefore are taking better care of themselves, staying in their zones of genius, building better teams, delivering better results, and that one day do have a shot to become a GroundForce company. So that's the alignment that I hope for. But in the meantime, I want to just support as many people as I can on their own journeys.
Fascinating. It's great stuff. Mark, I can't thank you enough for joining today. It's I could talk to you for another 12 hours. I mean, there's so
Yeah, I
many
feel the same way,
crossovers.
man.
When I worked with all these different families and clients, you see people of all different types, and you get to learn a lot about people, a lot about different businesses, and a lot about what really qualifies as success. And I couldn't agree more. I had
Mm,
a lot of clients that had a great deal of numbers after the first one that I couldn't say were happy. And I
yeah.
had a lot of people that had a lot less money that understood what the true happiness was. And that journey that you've taken, it's just extraordinary, exemplary. And I'm definitely going to read that book and probably going to write an article about it sooner rather than later because I think your message is incredibly important.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate
Mark,
that. Appreciate
thanks
that.
again for joining.
You too.
You've been listening to Mark Rampolla. Get the book. Get both books. Amazing journey, great conversation. This is Gary Cinderbrand. You've been listening to The Public Only Knew. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.